Hi, my name is Nicole Patterson, and I work as a teacher at All Saints Academy in the Diocese of Grand Rapids. For about 15 years, I've been teaching ELA workshop to anywhere from 3rd to 8th graders, and I found that combining SMART goals with conferencing really gets some good results, and I'd like to share those with you. In this video, we're going to talk about what SMART goals are, how they can be combined with one-on-one conferencing, how to get started using SMART goals in your classroom, how do you manage your workshop time, as well as student behavior, how do you keep track of student data, and what do students think about SMART goals? SMART goals stand for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. Conferencing one-on-one with students is part of my reading, writing workshop that I would never give up. There's so much to say about coaching students one-on-one through different reading and writing tasks. There's been so many great teachers who have come before me and developed coaching techniques and strategies in reading, writing workshops. This book, Reading Conferences by Jennifer Saravello, is one that has really influenced a lot of the ways I do things. But everyone's got to try to find their own way to hone these techniques and make them work for you. I taught older kids, 3rd through 8th graders, and I had a hard time with student motivation and holding kids accountable, especially when I was conferencing with other students. I started making SMART goals with my students and found that if they had goals to work on, they were much more likely to be focused and accountable. And then when I combined that with conferencing, I found that I really got some good results. The most important thing is that students know, where am I going? What are the best steps to get there? And what do I do when I feel lost or stuck? SMART goals and conferencing can work with any learning targets or curriculum, and it puts students in control of their own learning. Getting started, the hardest part, like rolling a ball uphill. In our first unit, students learn how they will be learning. I start with directly teaching about learning. I tell them we'll have 2 different kinds of learning in this class. Synchronous, the kind of learning that happens all together, and asynchronous, learning that we do individually. Learning different things at different times at different levels. Independent reading is a great place to start practicing this because most kids understand that this is asynchronous work. And you can teach kids to make reading SMART goals that of a specific number of pages read in a particular book by a certain date. Start with some workshop time where everyone will be working on their reading SMART goals. So during this independent reading time, I like to establish procedures for my workshop conferencing time. I personally like a sign-up board for help and concerns. And kids know that if they need help with something or want to discuss something, they write their name on the board. When I am in between conferencing, I look at the board and go and help anyone who needs it. I also like to give kids choice seating. Sometimes they have to get permission in order to sit somewhere. It's not a time to just let friends choose to all sit together, but some kids learn that they work better sitting alone somewhere or even going out in the hall. Some kids want to stretch out on the floor and Allowing some choice in where they sit, as long as they show me they can handle it, seems to be really motivating. I move from student to student, holding informal conferences, asking about what they're reading, why they like it, and really just getting kids acclimated to me moving around the room, conferencing with people, and having a strict no chatting, staying on task policy while I'm moving around and conferencing with students. Now, what you have to remember is that building students up into the kind of students that are independent learners and can make SMART goals and reflect on them is a slow process. And you need to assist students in the beginning in making goals, encouraging them to grow as that independent learner by constantly reflecting. But sometimes you need to push students a little bit. Some students are too overzealous, and you need to kind of like pull them back a little bit, get their goals a little more reasonable. You have to use formative and diagnostic assessments to find those skill gaps and to help them reach learning targets. Sometimes you have to help them break down the steps that they're going to need to take in order to reach those bigger goals, break them down into small steps. You're constantly providing feedback not only on how they're doing as far as their steps. They usually don't need a lot of feedback on that because they have measurable goals. So those goals they're going to know whether they met those goals or not. But you're providing a lot of feedback on the learning process and just a lot of encouragement along the way. When students are familiar with workshop conferencing time, begin making goals in other areas. Just be sure that procedures and expectations are well established. One thing I really like to use right now anyway is IXL. I've been using IXL for a few years, and I think it's great for asynchronous learning. There's a diagnostic arena, which can help uncover skill gaps. It gives kids immediate feedback. They have to reach a certain proficiency level or SMART points, which is an easy, measurable goal. It gives a lot of data on the usage and time that they're spending on there and how many questions they're answering, which is helpful for me to determine if they're getting stuck or having trouble, or if they're just not spending very much time working toward that goal. Here's one student explaining his own method for reaching his SMART goals on IXL.
Click that, and then duplicate. After that, I slide it over to this tab. With the other one, I slide it here, and I can learn with example. And then I just get to look at how to work on this exact IXL goal.
I use IXL because it's what we have here. But say you don't have IXL, don't worry about it. I've done SMART goals for a long time before I had IXL. The important thing is that you identify skills that can be improved, then help students to identify a clear and measurable task to improve that skill. Then help them learn how to reflect and analyze their own growth. Can you complete this quote from John Dewey? That's right. We don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. Reflection is a main ingredient. Let's review the big ideas we've covered so far. Asynchronous, individualized, SMART goals and regular conferencing really boost student growth. It also teaches students to take charge of their own learning. Start with something simple like independent reading to establish expectations and procedures of workshop time. Continually ask students to reflect on their own learning. as they say, the devil's in the details. It's easy to have these lofty goals, but how do you actually make SMART goals work in your classroom? Let's get down to some of the nitty-gritty details that make SMART goals work. So I hope you have decided that SMART goals and conferencing is worthwhile and something you want to include in your ELA workshop time. The next step is making time for it. What doesn't get planned doesn't get done. So here's an example of my schedule that I use for conferencing. I primarily conference on Wednesday and Thursday. Wednesday, I have a larger block of time, and whatever students I don't get to on Wednesday, I try to get to on Thursday. I have an A and a B week in my schedule, and so I see every kid in a formal conference at least every other week. In between our formal conferences, I sometimes am conferencing with them informally, coaching or answering questions, but every other week is kind of when we check on their SMART goals, reflect on their SMART goals, and plan new SMART goals. Now, you probably noticed that I schedule about 15 minutes or so for each conference. Now, in the beginning, when I'm establishing those procedures and expectations, I try really hard to stick to this time. However, as things progress, this time becomes less and less important, and I get more and more familiar with each student, and some students regularly only take 10 minutes. Other students need a little more coaching and take a little longer. So as things go, I sort of move away from sticking with a strict time. Flexibility is key. You may have a student that needs more than an every other week conference. In that case, put them on the schedule twice. So my students with IEPs or those who need more frequent check-ins, I just make sure they get what they need. So you've made time to conference, and now you sit down with your student. Start by asking how he or she is feeling about recent goals. What were the struggles? Were there any goals they didn't complete? What went wrong? What prevented them from accomplishing those goals? What goal did they feel they learned the most from, and why? Did they have any challenges to overcome? What was the most exciting part of the book they read? Do some coaching if needed. If there were some struggles, maybe read a passage of the book together. Do some IXL questions together, or look at that paragraph they wrote. Then plan their next goals. Hopefully, this is part of a bigger plan that you and the student are working toward. SMART goals should be bite-sized chunks that students can feel good about, specific, measurable, achievable, and finished in a timely manner. I make goals a little easy at the beginning to build up confidence, then get a little more difficult as we work on our problem-solving skills and learn new strategies. But what about relevant? Small goals should not be chosen at random, but they should build towards something bigger. For example, say a student's MAP scores show they're either below or way above grade level in vocabulary. Work to complete an individualized vocabulary program or workbook. Or perhaps work toward making their own journal of vocab words that are challenging. They can keep adding to it all year. One SMART goal that could kind of be a recurring one would be to add 5 more words from your designated amount of reading. So perhaps you do 50 pages of reading and you add 5 challenging words to your vocab journal. Now it's time to put all the pieces together. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that. But the most important thing is to have all the pieces present. As I'm conferencing with a student, I like to write their goals right in their planner with the due date and little check boxes that they can check off when they're done. I find that if I write them, it saves a tremendous amount of time. And it's also, I'm sure they're clear and I'm sure they're in there. If students run out of workshop time, they should take their goals home to work on for homework. And so they're right in their planner. I also encourage students to not only use the check boxes to say that they're done with a goal, but also to make little notations or highlight things they had trouble with. In this way, they're kind of self-assessing as they go. Another way to do it is to have a self-check paper or use a Google form. More on that in just a minute. I act as the secretary for our meetings and keep track of progress on my clipboard as well as in their planner. I find that this saves a tremendous amount of time. Students, I think, get very nervous if they're trying to write their goals down while I'm looking right at them. They get super nervous. It takes them a long time and they don't often write it down correctly, even if they're good writers. So this little trick really saves some time and just helps to keep the conversation going so that we can focus on the discussion and what the goals are. And I know it's clearly written in their planner. One of the biggest challenges with conferencing one-on-one with students is finding the time. And another time saver trick is to have students use a Google form to reflect and collect some data before you even conference. So especially with a larger class, having some reflection questions and some data collecting in a Google form that then you can just pull up as you're conferencing with a student. There's not so many, they're not thinking on the spot. It's kind of some of the thinking has been done ahead of time. Here's the example of what my own clipboard looks like with my conferencing notes. I have the date that I conference with the individual student and the notes and score from the rubric, and then the target date of our next conference. So one little trick is I tend to highlight these notes, and that lets me know that I've recorded it in our grading system. And I also put little notes at the bottom of possible things that everybody needs to know that I find myself doing a lot of coaching on. I will use that for a mini lesson. Also, I have a student with an IEP who's working on some very different goals. I keep a sticky note here to remind me of the things we're working on for her IEP goals, along with kind of a different method of checking in daily with this student. This may look terribly messy, but it works for me. Everyone has to find a system that works for them, where they can keep track of what's going on in their workshops and keep some data on how their students are doing and making progress on their SMART goals. To grade or not to grade? That's a tough question. For these formative assessments, some people would argue that you wouldn't want to take a grade. And for some grades and classes, I think just progress monitoring would be enough. I do have a rubric and sort of score them every time we have a formal conference. They get the most points for effort and perseverance. And I keep track of this. Not only some of the programs like IXL keep track of the time and number of questions they answer working on a particular skill, but also just informally as I move around the room every day, looking at their screens and looking at what they're doing. Also, organization is something I really want to encourage in my students, coming to class with all their materials to work on their goals, not forgetting their book at home, having all their materials and being ready to conference is something I want to encourage. And goal completion is actually last and a relatively small amount of points. So if you're working hard and you're organized and you're struggling and you don't complete a goal, it shouldn't hurt you in your grades. SMART goals and conferencing works because it combines what I've learned as best practices. Students are engaged and active in their own learning. They're given a choice and a voice in how they learn. They see a clear path to success and are involved in setting their own course toward that path. They get quality feedback and practice reflection techniques, forming good habits of mind. They also get to make a connection with a teacher who cares about them. Although I don't have any formal surveys, I've sent out a lot of informal surveys to past students and have really gotten good results. High schoolers routinely tell me that SMART goals in ELA not only improved their ELA scores, but also taught them learning strategies, how to prioritize, how to advocate for themselves, and how to stay organized, and how to set goals, and that those skills have really helped them in high school.
SMART goals are like personal goals that you set for yourself in order to become a better learner in ELA.
I like doing SMART goals individual because you can work at your own pace, and working at your own pace is way easier because if somebody is way ahead, you're not going to understand it as much.
And like the IXL skills help me like figure out how to write in new ways.
If you decide to use SMART goals in conferencing, it means giving up some control, which in turn means that some days it can feel like a big mess. I've been doing this for several years and I still have those days that feel very frustrating, like the kids just aren't getting it, like they can't do this. But if you persevere and keep going and keep taking little steps forward, you really will be amazed at the results you get at the end. Just be patient. Thanks for watching this video on energizing your ELA workshop with SMART goals and conferencing. I hope it helps your students. Check out the resources at the beginning of the video and feel free to contact me with any questions.